In the end of August 2016, a Category 5 Hurricane David wreaked havoc throughout the Caribbean and into the southern United States. Death and destruction were not all that was left in David's wake. Days later, on September 18th, an abandoned boat was reported drifting near the edge of what is called the Devil's Triangle. This wasn't just any boat. It was a legendary research vessel which had gone missing under horrific circumstances almost 20 years earlier. She had finally come back, and she had quite a story to tell. The following is an account of the return of the Flayed Lady, what she carried inside of her, and how she came back haunted. Drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem. Killers, cannibals, and cults. Fearful fiction and furious fact. Tall tales and terrifying truths. This is a Scary Home Companion. Enid Marbury stood at the bow of the Coast Guard cutter Elijah, staring out into the darkness, waiting to catch a glimpse of the legendary, lost Flayed Lady. Enid had been waiting for this for almost 20 years, since the day she had been told about her father's disappearance. A day that she still remembered with picture-perfect clarity, was burned into her brain as it had driven her unrelentingly ever since. And now, finally, her time had come. The Flayed Lady had been recovered. With it, Enid hoped to find evidence of what had really happened to her father. Joe Marbury was part of the 7-person crew of the research vessel when it went missing. There was only one survivor who had been found. She had been dehydrated and near death. Even after recovering, Kate Klein had never been able to give a satisfactory account of what happened. And then not long after, just a few months, Kate had died tragically in a home invasion. So there had never been any answers as to what happened. But all of that was about to change. Enid was prepared. Enid had spent that entire period of time preparing for this very moment. She was CPR certified at age 12, scuba certified at 13. She signed up for every sea rescue training course that she could find in southern Florida. At first, her family thought this was born from fear. Her father had been lost at sea, and perhaps they felt Enid was afraid the same thing might happen to her one day. Which wasn't the case at all. Enid was training. She was singularly driven by the prospect of being the one to find her dad and bring him home, no matter how long it took, in whatever condition he may be. Of course, Enid had the daughter's hope that he might have survived somehow and still be out there waiting for her. But she was pragmatic. She knew that couldn't possibly be the case. But it didn't matter. Regardless of whether he was alive or dead, Enid had to find him. She had to find out what happened. Enid didn't go to college. She joined the Coast Guard. For 4 years, she had been on patrol in the Northern Caribbean, centered heavily around the Grand Bahama Island area. She rode one cutter or another over the years, working on rescues and with emergency tows. Enid prowled the waters around the Devil's Triangle, waiting and watching. And then, just a few hours ago, the call had come in. The Flayed Lady had been sighted. Orders had come down from the top brass for an immediate launch to tow the old boat back to Florida and return it to her original owner, Lila Ambrose. Enid had actually been off shift that day in the middle of a 5-day leave. Her regular skipper, Captain Jill Henry, contacted her at home. The captain, like everyone else Enid worked with, knew about her history. As a courtesy, Enid was notified that she had 20 minutes to get to the Elijah before she left port. Enid was there in 12. There were a lot of people with a vested interest in the Flayed Lady. They wanted the boat back for study and to examine for possible evidence. This Coast Guard crew, they were just transport. They were just for towing. Henceforth, they didn't really give a shit about evidence. What they did give a shit about was that one of their own had a vested interest in the Flayed Lady. It meant something to Enid. The captain thought that Enid deserved a shot at closure. And then there was the pay. Something Enid didn't learn about until they were en route. The skipper told her, "We're all getting double overtime bonus pay for this." Miss Ambrose didn't think the government should have to pay out of their pocket for the recovery of her boat. Since she wanted it so fast, she offered to pay all the costs plus double the normal rate. I love that woman. Hey, did you know that Miss Ambrose offers free counseling and therapy for any survivors that we bring back from this sector? All of them, any of them, totally 100% free. She pays for it all. What did the world do to deserve someone like her? For the last hour, Enid had been clinging to that front rail, searching the darkness, waiting these last few minutes until there it was. She heard it just before she saw it. The slow, easy slap of water against the brittle hull. And then the darkness split apart, revealing the listing, weathered shape of the Flayed Lady, back from the dead. At first blush, the old boat looked too frail for a tow. On the other hand, she'd made it this far. She'd survived for this long, so another 280 miles or so probably wouldn't kill her. Besides, this was for Miss Ambrose. Big money Lila. All hands on fucking deck for the patron saint of the Triangle. They followed standard operating procedure, which had the boat quickly checked for survivors and possibly hazardous materials. Although they saw all kinds of eerie and dilapidated shit on board, there were no bodies, there was nothing living or dead, and nothing that seemed overtly dangerous to the cutter or her crew. With that, all that remained was to hook it up to the Elijah and start the journey back to port. One of the crew would need to stay on board the Flayed Lady to ensure that no problems developed. Enid didn't have to volunteer. Everyone knew that job had to be hers. Once they made it back to shore, the boat would go back to its rightful owner, and Enid would probably never see it again. Which gave her roughly 8 hours, the span of the rest of the night, until the sun came up, to pore over that boat, unfettered, to see what clues she might find. It was now or never. Enid checked the instruments at the helm with trembling hands, and then watched as the Elijah moved away and gently pulled the Flayed Lady along for the ride. She took a deep breath. The boat seemed as steady as could be, given the condition. She listed a bit to the port, but they had taken that into account with the tie-ups, and now, while in motion, the Flayed Lady was almost at an even keel again. The first thing that had struck Enid was that there were no barnacles on the hull. The wood was slick and shiny, well worn from years and years of constant use, but there was nothing sticking to it. There seemed to be no sign of sea life above or below decks. The only thing she saw that was a little unusual was a dusty maroon mold growing on the interior walls and ceilings. It was obvious that the boat had been floating empty for some time. Years, possibly. That said, it was just as obvious to Enid that the boat had been used as a home and a shelter for equally as long, if not longer. It was hard to say how long the Flayed Lady had been empty, but it was not empty for 20 years. Far from it. Which meant people had been living on this boat long after it vanished. Where had they been? She started the search at her father's quarters. Even though she'd never stepped foot on board the Flayed Lady, she knew every inch of her. And so she knew right where she wanted to go. Her father's tiny bunk was crammed full of junk. Empty cans and bottles, spools of wire, spare items removed from the other bunks. It looked like a makeshift garbage dump. The door to the room had been brutally ripped away. Splinters and shards clung around the edge of the frame like a broken set of teeth. Another room, Swede Melanic's old quarters, had apparently been used for sleeping. There was a pile of moldy blankets in the corner, jumbled up like a bird's nest. There were also dozens of maps tacked onto the walls. The ones deep underneath had actually bonded to the walls from years of sea salt and moisture. But they were just the foundation. There were hundreds more hand-drawn maps pinned on top of those original ones, layer after layer. And the newer the map, the more crudely drawn and scribbled it looked. Not to mention that at first glance they all seemed completely foreign to Enid. These maps were not for anywhere in the vicinity of the triangle. There were photographs as well, from 20 years ago, crewmate Candy Crozier was posing at both sun up and sun down, holding a compass whose readings made no sense. Enid heard it, loud and clear. It came from the front of the boat. Wielding her flashlight like a club, she eased her way up the hallway, taking the time to glance inside every open door before she passed it. More junk, and then a room that looked like a carnal house. One corner of this small room was layered with coat after coat of dried blood, so thick it was scabbed over in places. Sinister chains had been hammered into the walls to keep whatever was being killed immobile. Enid shuddered at the thought, but kept walking. And then, in a supply closet, with one of the doors slightly ajar, Enid found an altar. It had been made from scraps of wood. It was a pedestal about a foot off the floor, upon which sat two crossed femur bones under a human head. A grisly interpretation of the Jolly Roger. The femur bones were old and dried, picked over clean and nibbled at the ends. But the head was rotten, but still mostly intact. Enid was no pathologist, so she couldn't say for sure, but there was no goddamn way this head was more than a few weeks old. It still stunk of decayed blood and putrefied tissue, which meant someone had been on this boat very recently. She took a step back from the altar and looked down. There were bare footprints in the mold on the floor. Fresh footprints. There was another thump as the closet door pulled open behind her. Enid saw a man, emaciated and near death, staring at her with a rictus grin on his face. Surprised, startled, shocked, Enid stumbled away from the door. She caught her heel on the edge of the altar. It fell, tumbling to the side, and the severed head rolled across the floor towards the doorway. She reached out to catch herself and slashed the palm of her hand wide open on a jagged piece of wood. This grotesquely thin man with a grotesquely bloated stomach was nude, save for a sodden piece of fabric wrapped around his pubis. He stooped down and picked up the head before kissing it on the cheek. "I miss you, old friend," he wheezed. Enid swiveled the flashlight in her hand and raised it overhead to strike. Her blood ran down the handle and dripped onto her cheek. The man smiled at her again, and then she saw he had no choice, as his lips had been chewed away. "Please," he said, "I'm not going to hurt you." "Where did you come from?" she yelled at him. "We checked for survivors. You weren't here." "I hid. I was afraid. I didn't know who it was, what you might be. And then I saw you and I wasn't afraid anymore. Please, I need help." "Who are you?" The man introduced himself as Julian Ortiz, a name she was familiar with. He was the captain of the Flayed Lady. The captain raised the head and introduced it to her as First Mate Santana. Enid kept her flashlight raised like a war club and gently picked up her comm from her belt. "Skip," she said quietly, "we have a survivor." Ortiz stared at her, unblinking, ever smiling. His limbs were gangly and crisscrossed with vein work, but his lower belly was grossly distended with bloat. He scratched at the wooden floor with nailless toes. "Are you secure, Marbury?" the skipper said. "I'm fine." "Does the survivor need medical assistance?" "Skip, he needs a whole lot fucking more than we can give him. This guy says he's Captain Ortiz from the original crew." There was a brief pause. "Enid, hold tight while I check on something." Enid gestured for Ortiz to move away so that she could get out of the closet and away from this ghastly altar he had built. "Let's go above deck," she said. But after a certain point, Ortiz would move no further, standing between her and the steps. "No, I need to stay down here, just for now." He squinted and read the name off her chest. "Are you kin to Joe? Joe Marbury?" "Yes, I'm his daughter, Enid." "Daughter? No. Joe's daughters are little. They're just little girls." "No, not anymore, Captain. You've been gone for a while." "Oh, yes, I know. 3 years by my calculation. It's so hard to tell over there. It could be 5. Time doesn't work the same there as it does here. Life and death and time, and none of it matters." "No, sir. Not 3 years. 19, almost 20. No. That's not possible." He held the severed head of his first mate up to his face, pressing forehead to forehead like they used to, and he whispered to his old friend. "Captain Ortiz, I need you to pay attention. Sir. What happened to my father? What happened to Joe Marbury? Please, tell me. I need to know. He looked up from the head and nodded gravely. It was pure chaos when we crossed over. We had been told the breach was out there, but none of us really believed it. Not until we saw it. And then it saw us. Most of them got taken overboard by the drowned things in the black water. They got taken to the island right away. But not me and Santana. We fought hard. We pulled the boat away from them. But then we couldn't find the breach. We couldn't get back. We were lost on the other side. It's not hell. That's what they say, but it's not. It's like living in a dream. It's just not a dream that people will like. I call it a nightmare, I suppose, but if you spend long enough in a place, you can get used to anything. And a nightmare just becomes your life. Enid nodded, growing increasingly impatient. The man was obviously deranged and mentally incompetent, but her need to know overrode her sympathy. It overrode everything. Sir, my father, Joe Marbury. What happened? He didn't make it. He got hurt. I saw that. He got ripped open. But then he jumped off the boat. And he stayed here, on this side. I didn't find out what happened to Joe for a very long time. But you did find out. Oh yes, of course. Bobby told me. Bobby? You mean Bobby Gig? Ortiz nodded. Her comm crackled. It was the skipper. Enid? It's Jill. I'm so sorry that I have to do this. That you have to do what? But there was no response. And then Enid knew what was happening. She could hear it in the desperate tone of the captain's voice. She shouldered past Ortiz and bolted up the steps. Orders came in, Enid, straight from the DRO itself. That ship is contaminated with something biohazardous. You've been exposed. We've all been exposed, but you more than us. We have no choice. It's orders. Enid got topside and saw the lights of the Coast Guard cutter Elijah sailing away under the Cheshire moon. Now, Enid was very alone, except for the shambling figure walking up behind her. are they going?" Captain Ortiz bemoaned. No, 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 I need them. We need them. Enid took a step away. "You said Bobby Gig told you what happened to my dad. How? He wasn't with you." "He and Kate escaped. I talked to him later, after I went to the island. It's not so much that I talked to him. I saw what he saw. I can show you, if you'd like." His jaw gaped open, and Enid saw a dark, oozing black slug crouched under his tongue. It glittered dull green in the moonlight. "Let me show you." Enid brought the bulky flashlight sideways across his jaw, sending him up against the railing, and then she ran past him towards the front of the boat. There had to be a gaff or something that she could use as a weapon. "We floated out there for weeks. My best friend and me. Didn't we, amigo?" the captain said. He slowly sauntered towards Enid, in no particular hurry, and spoke in turn to her and the head in his hand. "I thought it was weeks, then months. I suppose it was years, wasn't it? Just the two of us. And after a time, we both knew that we should be dead. No food, no water. We kept getting pulled back towards the island, but we kept fighting it. We found other islands, but we never stopped, not with what we saw on them. We were wasting away, hungry and weak, and yet death would never come for us. It wouldn't come. The hunger got so bad. You can never understand that kind of need. No one can understand it. It was blinding. I eventually killed him, my best friend. I killed him. And I cut off his leg so that I could eat it." Ortiz paused to look up at the moon. He marveled at its brilliance. "That's when we learned that life and death held no meaning over there. No moon, no sun, no stars, no weather. Just the ocean, and black ocean. You don't die there. You can't die there. That's what we learned. I had to chain him up. And you understand why. Of course, he was so angry. He was so angry. I would be too. But it was the only way I had to eat. Since he couldn't die, I got to keep him. I got to keep my best friend with me. I never had to lose him. Even though I was eating him, I ate his limbs just a little at a time. I took bits and pieces until they were gone, and then I had to start taking parts from inside of him. I ate every last bit of him. And he got to keep me company the whole time. He wasn't happy about it, but that's okay. I was used to his ill temper. Eventually, all that was left was this. He looked at Santana's severed head. He was the one that told me to go to the island, to stop running from my fate. And he was always very smart. I listened to him. And he was right. They received me like I was a hero. And then they took me down below. And they filled me up with wonders. And then they sent me back on my boat to find you. Or someone like you. Enid's back was against the rail. She still had nothing more fearsome than a flashlight with which to defend herself. Ortiz stepped up close to her. The island. That's where I met Bobby. He was gonna eat your dad. How about that? Just like I ate my friend, he was going to eat his friend. But he never got a chance. A big old shark gobbled him up. His lips were gone, but now his cheeks were pulling up, and Ortiz really was smiling. Ain't that a bitch? You know, all that time, I had my best friend with me to keep me company. And it made everything seem okay. And then we came back here, and now he's dead. Now he's for real dead. Maybe he always was. But I think you can be my friend now. Do you want to be my friend? He cackled and lunged, and she smashed him again with the flashlight with diminishing results. He barely seemed to feel it, and she struggled to wrench herself away from his grasp. Pushed up against the bow, leaning over the water, Enid looked up at the moon, and she saw a small boat moving towards them at a rapid clip. There was a tiny little flash of white and yellow, followed by another. Enid fell to the deck, looking up into the grinning visage of Captain Ortiz. She saw how his bloated belly was now moving, squirming beneath the skin as if filled with a writhing swarm of slugs. He opened his mouth. It was full of black and green. Then the top quarter of his skull popped open like a jack-in-the-box, spraying gore and brains into the salty sea breeze. For a moment, the captain stayed upright. Enid saw a long, pulsing black slug wriggle out of the open head wound. And then his belly jostled and sloshed, and his mouth opened so far the jaw snapped, as a torrent of black goo poured out of him. Enid pushed back away from it, scrambling in a panic as dozens and dozens of wriggling black slugs splashed across the deck of the Flayed lady. They all started squirming towards her. His body toppled and fell, and the last few slugs slithered out of his ass and his head wound. One of them crawled onto her boot. She kicked it away, then used the railing to pull herself to her feet. She saw the other boat was very close now. There were 4 people on the deck. "Enid," a woman called out, "don't let them near your mouth." "Or your south mouth," said a man. "South mouth? Fuck's sakes, Manny." "Shit, Sade, I don't know what to call it." "Well, don't call it a south mouth." The slugs crawled up Enid's legs. She tried her best to swat them away. And then one of them undulated towards her and slipped its tip into the cut across the palm of her hand. It slithered right up inside of her. She felt it in her meat, inchworming up her wrist, crawling around her bones and blood vessels. She saw the bulge under her skin. The other boat bumped into the Flayed lady. 2 men jumped on board. One of them attacked the slugs as they crawled, using what looked like a dumbbell, but hummed like an electromagnet. The other man, wearing an eye patch, knelt down beside her and looked at her arm. The man with the dumbbell was swinging it back and forth in a tight arc. Under its invisible beam, the slugs sizzled, fried, and cooked, dissolving into puddles of bubbling goo on the deck. The man with the eye patch took off his belt and tied it tightly around Enid's arm, just below the shoulder. The slug was moving north at a rapid clip. There was very little time to work with. "Sade, I need a field amputation kit." And she threw him a chainsaw. "Wait! What?" Enid panicked, and she tried to struggle, but the one-eyed man held her down firmly. He started the chainsaw with his teeth. "Sorry, lady," he said sheepishly, and then quickly sliced off her arm just below the elbow. Enid screamed. She spasmed and shook, but the man held her down as best he could. The blood flow was greatly restricted by the belt, but Enid was still bleeding profusely. Her severed forearm flopped down next to her, and the oozing green-black end of the slug appeared. It slithered across the 6 inches of open deck before slipping into the gaping wound of Enid's upper arm. "Well, fuck me running," the one-eyed man said. "Lady, I'm really sorry." And with another strong, steady slice, he removed the arm just below the shoulder. For Enid, everything was spinning. The moon reached down and gobbled her up, and she felt herself drifting away. until all was dark. Enid, a soft voice called to her. Enid, honey. Her eyes fluttered open. She was laying on the deck of another boat now. The moon was back in the sky where it was supposed to be. A pale woman knelt next to her. Behind her was a man with a sniper rifle and a heavily bandaged face. Enid looked down and saw her stump of an arm had been bandaged. What happened? Who are you people? Enid, we're the good guys. Thank you for listening to another episode of A Scary Home Companion. The last time we saw the Flayed Lady was in her final voyage. If you've never listened to that episode, I highly recommend it, as well as the follow-up, Dead in the Water. You can find the show on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and every once in a while, Twitter. You can also contact the show directly at ascaryhomecompanion@gmail.com. If you really want to support the show, check out the Patreon, where we try and give you more of what you love, which is quality content. Bonus episodes, 10 full bonus episodes, and counting. A lot more coming in 2022. The episode was edited and produced by Jeff Davidson and featured music by Daniel Birch, Looking Out to Sea, and Boat to the Island. Regional Curse with Best Believe and Natural Living. Kaiju with Hull, Tusk Lord, Trapped in Kraken. Dark Urru, Starlings in Treetops. Jed Hershon, Black Ocean. Evil Sword with Dead. And as always, Chelsea Oxdendine with the theme music. The Flayed